This is one of a series that Allied has done throughout the pandemic and onward on mental health in children and anything that affects them. We will be taking questions, Q&A throughout the presentation. You're able to put those questions up and we'll either answer them as we go. The panelists will type, or you can put things in the chat, and either way we'll get to as many questions as we can. This presentation will be emailed to everybody who registered, whether you're here or not. I guess if you're not here, you're not hearing me. But if you have friends, they will be emailed to them, and you can feel free to email the presentation to anybody that you'd like. My name is Kerry Fierstein. I'm Chief Executive Officer of Allied Physicians Group. I'm a practicing pediatrician for over 30 years, a mother of 3, and now a grandmother of 1. So my grandson is 2.5, and he started preschool today. And whether it's your child or your grandchild, when they walk out that door, a piece of your heart goes with them, and you hope that they have a good day and that everything goes well and they come home happy. And that continues for every day that they leave you. And we know that students who experience bullying are at increased risk for depression, anxiety, sleep difficulties, lower academic achievement, and dropping out of school. Students who are bullied are more likely to become bullies, perpetuating the cycle. So this really is a very important topic, and I'm very excited that we have such a wonderful panel here tonight. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and then we will start the presentation. So Joe, let's start with you.
Good evening, everybody. Pleasure to be with you tonight. I'm Joe Salamone. I'm the founder and executive director of the Long Island Coalition Against Bullying. We're a nonprofit organization on Long Island that specifically focuses 100% of our efforts in helping kids, families, and schools combat and deal with bullying-related issues.
And Dr. Montague.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Janice Montague. I'm a practicing pediatrician in Suffolk, New York, in Rockland County, and I have a special interest in mental health from, I would say, toddlerhood to teenagers and beyond. I treat all kinds of things, but have grown over the years to really, as they call it, champion the mental health of children, and know that if we don't have mental health, then we don't have our other health. So hopefully you guys will enjoy this seminar and get a lot out of it to take forward into this new school year.
Thank you, Janice. I always learn something when I hear you talk. Dr. Lashley.
Hi, I'm Marc Lashley. I'm a practicing pediatrician for over 30 years also. I currently practice at Valley Stream Pediatrics in Valley Stream and at Island Pediatrics in the Rockaways. I'm the chairman of Allied Physicians Group's Mental Health Committee, and I'm really excited to be here tonight to talk about this great topic.
Great. So Marc, why don't you start us off?
Okay. Let's have our first slide, please, Ariel. Thanks. So first of all, let's define what bullying is. And so we know what we're talking about. So it's really a persistent, permanent, unwanted, aggressive behavior. It occurs because we need two parties, one who is being bullying and one who is being bullied. There is a perceived or real power imbalance where, although we're talking mostly about children, power imbalances can really be very present to them. It's a very real thing to them. As Dr. Fierstein said, bullying can have lasting problems. It is an early indicator of problem behaviors. If you look back at people who have been arrested for juvenile offenses such as theft, vandalism, or fighting, historically, they were either bullies or being bullied. So these are children that we need to intervene and identify. So why is it so hard to know if your child is being bullied? I mean, every parent who has a child who has been bullied can tell you it was not readily apparent to them that this was happening. So it's really important that we go over the signs. It is difficult behavior to detect. And I want to expand the definition of what we're talking about today to cyberbullying as well. because it's become a very predominant way that children are experiencing bullying. In the 2019 National Crime Victimization Survey, they found that in grades 9 through 12, 16% of children reported to have experienced some kind of cyberbullying. So it's a real hurtful and problem behavior for children. So classically, when we talk about physical bullying, it can cause physical injury. So if your child has bruises that are unexplained, and they try to maybe say that it happened on the playground, or it happened because they fell, or ran into a wall or something, if the story does not make sense to you, if the explanation of the injury doesn't make sense, or they're too frequent, it should raise red flags for you. If a child is losing things such as clothing, books, or electronics, are they being taken from them? Is it something that they're fighting over and are too embarrassed to tell you about? Being bullied can be very shameful for a child. So obviously they might want to hide that because it might affect their self-esteem to admit that something was taken from them. And conversely, if your child is showing up with things that don't seem to be theirs, or it doesn't seem like somebody would have given them a ring or a bracelet, or something that doesn't seem like an appropriate gift, think to yourself, was this something my child took from someone? Frequent headaches, stomach aches, complaints such as faking illness. Of course, a child who is experiencing bullying is going to do what they can to try to get out of the situation. So one way out of school in general is to fake injury or illness. Changes in eating habits. Well, we all know that if you're bullied, it can lead to depression. Now, depression is not very common in children under 12, but if they are experiencing depression, bullying is a major causal factor. So if a child shows signs of depression, such as less eating, skipping meals, or coming home hungry because maybe their school lunch was not eaten, that's a red flag. Difficulty sleeping. If you're having anxiety or ruminating about the events of the day, that someone was aggressive towards you or had unwanted contact with you, it can mess with your sleep. Declining grades, big sign of somebody who's having mental stress. So we always look at that. Sudden loss of friends. Sometimes, especially in girls, friendship circles can be very changeable and can be cruel. So if there is a sudden loss of friends, maybe you should network with the parents and talk about what's going on there. Decreased self-esteem, which is another depressive symptom. And then lastly, self-destructive behaviors, such as running away, talking about suicide. Those are more distressing. Next slide. And why don't kids ask for help? When a child is experiencing bullying, as I said, there is a perceived power imbalance. They feel helpless. They don't feel like there's anyone that can help them. They don't look at you as their parent, as their savior. I remember when I was growing up in the, I think 3rd or 4th grade, I was experiencing bullying, and my big sister was my savior. She came to school and met me in the playground because I told her that I was going to have trouble. I did not feel like I go to my parents about it, but my big sister was there for me. Not everybody has a big sister to fight for them like I did. And also, it's not a permanent solution, is it? Although showing up with a power group can offset the perceived power imbalance that children feel. I know it sounds kind of funny to talk about power imbalances when you're talking about a 3rd grader, but this is a very real thing to them, for sure. Kids may fear a backlash, like if they tell on the bully, will that just make it worse because parents are not in the situation that they can fix it, or the children do not perceive them to be able to fix it. And if in fact it is a half-handed response from parents, then the bully is still emboldened and able to continue the behavior. It might be worse. So I agree that it could make it worse if it's not handled properly. It's humiliating to be bullied. They don't want you to know. It's part of their self-esteem, as I mentioned before. They feel weak, or maybe they feel that they'll be punished because they're too weak. We've all seen those after-school specials where the parents tell the children to stand up for themselves and fight for themselves. And if the child feels that they can't do that, what kind of person are they? So it could actually backfire on them. That kind of an intervention. Kids who are bullied sort of have like a invisible target on them. So they might feel socially isolated already. So if a child is not having a lot of friends or is having difficulty making friends, they're more vulnerable to bullying because they don't have a support system around them at school, friends who will stand up for them, or someone to bolster their self-esteem. And lastly, it's very hard to protect kids from bullying. So if they fear that they're losing support or something like that, it's very hard on them. Next slide. So why don't kids, I'm sorry, no, you can go on. So signs that a child is bullying others, because we talked about a child being bullied. Well, what if your child is the bully? And this is just as important to recognize as someone who's being bullied, because it's the other side of the coin. And children who bully others, as I said earlier, it's an early indicator of problem behaviors, not just for the bullied person, but for the bullier. They're more likely to get into physical or verbal fights, have friends who bully others, so they hang around with other bullies. They can be increasingly aggressive as they become teenagers because they've gotten away with this behavior, or they've gotten some kind of a gain from this behavior. It either elevated their social status or made people to comply with what they wanted due to their aggression. So they had positive feedback from that aggression because it went unchecked. And these are children who are often in the principal's office. So if your child's called to the principal's office for fights, you have to ask, why is your child being aggressive? I mean, they might explain it away as somebody else who was aggressive with them, but you have to be able to raise these questions and look at your child more critically. Does the child, as I said earlier, have a piece of jewelry or an object or unexplained money? Where are they getting this from? Do they blame others for their problems? This one did that one did that. It's because of this guy, that guy, they're after me. Sometimes these explanations are just that their child is trying to rationalize the behavior when actually it's unwanted aggression. When someone doesn't accept responsibility for their actions, it can be a sign of being a bully, explaining away problem behaviors. And lastly, if they're very competitive, worried about their reputation too much, their popularity too much, anybody who's trying to protect themselves too much as far as reputation might back it up with aggression. So that might be a sign of a bully. So I believe that's my last slide. I'm going to stop here and pass the torch to Dr. Montague, who's going to pick up the conversation.
I believe Joe will be taking over next.
Oh. Go ahead, Joe.
Thank you, Dr. Lashley. So, kind of, we've looked at the signs. Now, we should look at the why. And in particular, the last part Dr. Lashley left off at was, the signs that they could be engaging in bullying behavior. But why are they engaging in it? There are a couple of, key areas of focus on the why. So peers, mental, familial issues, and school environment are kind of the bucketed reasons as to why. When you're looking at peer involvement, it's to obtain power in a social structure or an elevated status. Dr. Lashley just mentioned that they're protective of their popularity. So in order to protect that popularity, they may act out in some kind of a self-preservation type mode. It could be an attempt to fit in better or with a specific group. Drawing from a personal story of mine, I got bullied predominantly through middle school, all through middle school, and then most of high school. And what I did notice was that a lot of the kids that were participating in the aggression were kids that were actually trying to fit in with other kids who were the bullies. They, for whatever reason, wanted to be seen as popular kids, so they acted the way they acted. Stigmatized or excluded by others at school. So maybe they are the ones that are actually experiencing the bullying. More often than not, that's one of the major key factors and key reasons as to why what's happening to them is happening. I don't have particular pride in saying it, but as a way of dealing with my bullying, I became other kids' bullies at times. It is a very common thing. And again, going back to the social status, possessions, or achievements, jealousy and envy are large motivating factors here as well. If they have something that they want and for whatever reason they can't have it and somebody else does, they'll try to seize it or belittle or demean individuals who have things or have a status or things that they want. Additionally, included in that is also academics factors into that too. It's not just tangible possessions. Academics is a very, very high stakes environment to be in. And when you're competing with each other for grades and such, this type of aggressive behavior can happen without really being without there being an active malice behind it. It kind of just, starts to occur, microaggressions, things like that. When you then go over toward the mental side of things, again, they themselves are being bullied, ties into their own stigma or exclusion of things, their own sense of insecurity or low self-esteem. I'm sure whether they're kids or adults, we all know people who feel not so good about themselves, and a way of coping with that is to try to make somebody else feel smaller or inferior to the way they feel. That's the whole going back to the imbalance of power thing, and where it's actually a perceived imbalance of power, the creation that I am more powerful than you, or that you are weaker than me. Lack of understanding of others' emotions and empathy. I think if I had to pinpoint one major negative byproduct of the pandemic, it is the disconnect that kids have with fundamental respect and engagement and empathy and feeling for the emotions of somebody else, and even the passive interest in wanting to walk through life, even for a moment, in what somebody else may feel like it in their shoes. So empathy is huge. Lack of or a limited ability to control their individual emotions. That's pretty, self-explanatory. They've got emotional issues of their own. That's not necessarily something that would necessarily indicate bullying per se, but definitely at times can be motivating. And kind of parlayed into that is a lack of social skills or positive expression. Moving over to familial aspects, that's where it gets a little bit more difficult, because there are a lot of kind of counterintuitive things going on there at one time. So, of course, individuals at home who are part of home environments where there's bullying or aggression or violence part in the home are more likely to replicate that amongst their environment. So there, if you see an example, it doesn't always need to be the good example that's set for them to replicate some of the example before them. Lack of attention from a parent. Obviously, kids crave the attention of their parents. They want validation of their parents. And if they don't feel like they're getting it, they will act out as maybe in the beginning of a way of seizing the attention, because it can be felt that maybe negative attention is better than none. But at least they're paying attention to me. Lack of emotional support or an effective communication system. So part of that also is going back to the attention from a parent, feeling like you do or don't have the support of those around you at home. We all have issues in our work lives. The kids have issues in their school lives, but we kind of come to an understanding that those around us in our home life are going to be supportive of us. So when we're not getting that at home, it makes it that much difficult as well. The other piece, and the specific piece that's kind of counterintuitive, is it used to be considered those kids who had no real structure at home, could kind of do whatever they want, were more likely to kind of act out because they were not getting consequences held to them. But it almost works the flip side as well, where if they come from too authoritative of a household, the same likelihood can occur there as well. So you really do kind of have to try to find almost the perfect imbalance almost of, are you too authoritative or are you too lenient? Some things you might have to let fly, some things you might want to act on, but it used to be, you know, that we all kind of labored under this misconception that the no kids who came from households with no rules, for whatever reason that was, we're more inclined to participate in this behavior, but that's not necessarily the case anymore. And again, low parental or caregiver involvement. And to the point of that that an individual just brought up in the chat, social media is becoming more reliant on for parents to kind of use for their kids to kind of parent for them, which definitely makes it harder. And the last piece is the school environment. There is no school district, certainly not on Long Island or anywhere, that I would venture a guess to say that would clearly say that they have a bullying is totally tolerated. Most of the time you'll hear the phrase zero tolerance. But what does that mean? You can say there's a zero tolerance, but you actually have to have consequences that are attached to it. If you have an environment where it looks like this behavior will be accepted, of course, it should not defy conventional wisdom to think that this behavior will flourish. So school environment or the lack of a strong school environment definitely plays into that. So influencing proper conversations, and this really all does tie together. One of the things we are seeing since the pandemic, the kind of breakdown in fundamentals like respect and, as I mentioned before, empathy. I think it's beholden, and unfortunately, it's kind of sad that we have to do this kind of reminding, but respect is something that needs to be taught squarely from home. Those are the roots of foundation. You don't have to love everybody, you don't have to like everybody, but we are all expected to respect everybody. So one of the things that we have been seeing in particular, especially coming out of the height of the pandemic, were lack of tolerance or respect for views on the pandemic, science versus maybe not scientifically motivated opinions, masks. Are you masker, or are you an anti-masker? At the end of the day, neither one of those really mattered. If you wanted to wear a mask once it became optional. LGBTQ issues. LGBTQ students are exponentially more targeted than heterosexual or non-LGBT students. And politics. I can give you countless stories of how many times over the course of the election season in 2020, where the temperature that got turned up so high as related to politics, bleeding into the school environment and creating issues, it became palpable. So really, again, it just boils down to parents setting the proper conversations and parameters that, as long as we all kind of approach everything with, I may not understand it, I may not accept it, but I'm going to respect it. It can kind of level the playing field for everybody and kind of hopefully, move us in a direction where some of these type of conversations don't need to be had anymore. Next slide. So back to the specific issue of bullying and parents. So what if they are being bullied? So we did a statistic, my organization did a statistic survey back in 2015 and 2016. This is particularly important because 84% of the kids that we surveyed, which the average age was 14 and pretty evenly split between boys and girls, yielded 84% of them would rather confide in a friend than talk to an adult. Second to that was 47% would admit that they would go to their parents. Now, so right off the bat, more than likely, as we already mentioned a few times tonight, parents are not going to be the first to find out that this is going on. And if they know, they don't know to necessarily how great an extent. So if they were to come forward and actually say, yes, we are, I am experiencing this, it's important to right off the bat listen and offer the support and encouragement, knowing that they're not likely to bring this to you. The fact that they are has to be welcomed, and they have to be thanked for confiding in you. You're going to listen. You're not going to judge. You're going to reassure them that you're there to help. Again, like Dr. Lashley mentioned in the beginning, there's a disappointment factor that comes along, particularly with talking to parents. They don't want to disappoint their parents. They don't want to be necessarily humiliated, but for sure not in front of their parents. So reassure them that you're there to help and that you appreciate the fact that they did confide in you. How can we make the best choice as a family to resolve this issue? Now, that's a very loaded question, which I'm going to evolve to on the next slide, but check-ins and follow-through are important. It's not make one phone call to one person and just think that it got better. Continue to remind them that the communication is always open, and that if anything does continue to happen, that they should continue to let you know. And the biggest piece of advice would be to work through the school. It would be strongly advised, at least from our perspective, to avoid, getting caught up in the emotion and going and ringing the doorbell of the parents who are accused of being, whose kid is being accused of being the bully. It does not typically turn out to be the way that you think it will occur. Not saying that that's a hard and fast rule, but typically with how fast everybody as a parent is rightly to protect their child, it's not likely that you're going to be met with an equal partner on the other end of that conversation to accept that. The other piece of this is, as we already mentioned tonight, the idea that can coming forward make it worse? And the answer is yes, it can. And unfortunately, in some cases, in the immediate short term, it does have a tendency to make it worse. However, there are two big things. The first one is, and I know a lot of parents who do this, they kind of will leave it up to the child to say how they would prefer it be handled. And that's okay in the beginning. But ultimately, they're coming from a motivating factor of fear of not wanting the situation to be made worse, as well as embarrassment and humiliation. But you are the parent. At some point in time, the decision on what to do does fall to you to make. They can be participants in it, but they have to trust the idea that you're not going to act in any interest that's going to continue to harm them if it can be avoided. And unfortunately, it does bear reminding to them that, okay, you don't want me to say anything, fine, that we did that in the beginning. But if I continue to say nothing, silence is only making this issue that much worse. It might make it worse if we come forward and we say something and the bullies get in trouble, but nothing has an opportunity to get worse if we don't bring it to the proper people's attention. So usually when you phrase it to them from that respect, it kind of gets them, somewhat reluctantly, but a little bit more on the participatory side of wanting to actually see something get done with it. I think I have one more. So what specifically? Engage them in a conversation about bullying and the related emotions and behaviors by being honest. Share personal experiences, compare with them. Do not sit them down and interrogate them. Open-ended questions and directives, like tell me, what does bullying, what does bullying mean to you? Why do you think kids bully? Tell me 2 things your school is doing about bullying. Who would you talk to if you felt like you were being bullied or knew somebody who was? Obviously, of course, aside from us. Develop a safe space. Remind them that their home is a safe space. Utilize verbal and nonverbal prompts. A good way of having this conversation is often in an indirect way. It could be in a car. When you're not sitting down face to face with them, it can be passive. You're both staring out the front windshield. You're not making eye contact with each other. And it's a little bit less of an intimidating forum that you kind of establish the comfort level. And you can't really judge per se, or it feels less judgmental because you're not looking at them square in the face during the conversation. And respect their viewpoints. They may come at you with some answers that you may disagree with. but still respect their point of view on the particular topic. And now I will pass it off to Dr. Montague.
Thank you. So someone actually wisely asked in the chat, like, basically what can parents do? And Joe alluded to some of that, a lot of that. And I think that to me in a room when I'm with a patient is one of the most important things to get going is, okay, between the three of us here, how can we get something in motion to make this child feel better or deal with the bullying? But first, I think the most important thing is, whoever gave our definition, I think it was Marc who gave the definition of bullying, is to confirm the pattern of behavior. And not to say that kids lie, but they also have learned that bullying is when anyone looks at them wrong or says something to them or throws the ball at their head. And we want to make sure there's a pattern. And so the best way to do that is to really, ask them when it happens. Does it happen every recess? Does it only happen in English class? Is it always the same kid? And then maybe to ask trusted adults in their lives, like, a coach, maybe it's happening on a team, or a teacher, or someone that may be able to also give you a little bird's eye view of what's going on, so that we can confirm the behavior. I would say 9 times out of 10, it is true, and the child's being bullied, and physically or verbally. Speaking to these adults can often give you some insight as to why it happens, who these children are, why that child might be the bully, why your child might be the victim. I find that teachers and coaches and people, who know our kids outside our home often have really good insight into why and where and how, and that could help us intervene or give our kids the tools to say, hey, when you line up for gym, you don't necessarily have to be behind, that child that's bothering you, because now that whenever they line up for gym, this kid pushes your child or something like that. Or maybe talking to a coach about trying your kid in a different position, an offense or defense, so that they don't necessarily have to be next to them, playing or swimming in the same lane or whatever is going on behind the scenes. But getting other adults involved can often give you a lot of insight. Plus, having other adults, like Joe was saying as well, that our kids are not likely to really even talk to us about bullying. They're embarrassed, they're shy. They think it's just, it's just one of those things, and every kid goes through it. My mom and dad, they don't care, or I'm embarrassed about it. They'll think that I'm not, trying my best to be, stand up to the bully. Because, kids are taught from an early age that they should just stand up to the bully. And when I ask them specifically in a room, okay, well, what does that mean to you? And I specifically asked them questions. If somebody was doing X, Y, and Z to you, who would you go to, or what would you do? A lot of them do say, I would go to my teacher, my mom, my friend, but some just shrug their shoulders and don't know. So we have to give them those tools, and having those other people involved, like a teacher or a coach or a preacher or somebody in your life who can reinforce those tools, even a counselor, somebody really can help us get those tools practiced, because sometimes our kids are a little more defensive with us than they are with other adults who they respect. I do believe in speaking with the school. Most bullying is happening at school. I keep talking about teams because I've definitely seen it, including my own daughter with sports, but it's usually at school. I mean, definitely the social media thing is, I think, mostly an extension of the school, right? So the problem is that kids have no safe space now. They used to come home, and as Joe said, home's safe, and we want to reassure our kids that home's safe, but they have their phones and their computers, and unfortunately those bullies follow them into their homes through social media. So limiting their social media often helps, or being a parent that's very involved in their social media usage is helpful. But definitely getting the school involved in that kind of thing, saying, listen, this kid, no matter where my child is bothering him. He might be at the school, but he's being bothered, but it's following him home. And that's where the school should still get involved, because it's following him home from school. It's not, if it was only at home, it's your neighbor, I think that's a little more difficult to get the school involved. But I do believe that the school can be a good mediator. The school can give the kids good lessons. We have a good bullying program in the middle school here. I'm not sure, I'm not going to say it's followed, to a T, but all the teachers are trained and the students get in service, sort of on it every year in middle school. I think that that's a good thing to sort of reinforce with the school, like, hey, my kid's gone through this bullying thing, whether it's in 5th grade or 7th grade, and, he's still being bullied. And I think maybe we need some reinforcement. That's good for the school to know. If we don't bring that to the school, how will they know that that stuff isn't working? They also need to look out for our kids because, as Joe said, it can lead to, or Marc said, I think, suicidality and behavior issues. And if you're getting phone calls home that your child's, acting out in school or leaving the classroom or maybe crying, breaking down, not handing work in, it's possible that, it's connected to the bullying. I think it's also important to ask like lunch monitors, maybe in elementary school, what's happening in the cafeteria. Maybe you don't have direct access to them, but you can ask the school counselor to, or ask the principal to. It's really important to give our kids extracurricular activities that will build their self-esteem, right? We talked about how self-esteem can lead to bullying on both ends, being a bully or being bullied. And if we can give our kids things they love, I think classically our kids are like enrolled in lots of things that are sort of quote normal, but we have to find what works for our kids. Some kids don't do well in teams. They do better solitary, like golf or tennis or bowling. I find is like a really great sport for kids. There's also some great therapeutic horseback riding, which I think is wonderful for kids' self-esteem, learning to get on this big animal who loves you and is taking you around and being confident on this. We do a lot of those around here. Those kids really become much more confident and able to sort of say, like, if I can control this horse, I could probably go out there in the world and, tell this bully to leave me alone. And other things like even art classes, we can do therapeutic art classes where you could do that with an art therapist, or just there are other places to look for, just places they can really get their hands dirty in art and create. And some kids feel once they're getting their artistic endeavors out, their self-esteem goes up. I love martial arts. I think most of us can agree that's great for kids' self-esteem. It's great for their physicality. It's great to learn when not to use our hands, because that's what most of the senseis teach us, is when to use our hands, when not to, how to calm our aggression. I think mindfulness activities with kids, just being in the moment, learning to calm down, really learning what to say back. The other strategies that I tend to do to deal with the bullies are sort of funny. A kid might say, you're stupid, and they could just turn around and say, well, hey, at least I'm cute. And it doesn't really hurt anyone's feelings, because the kid didn't say back, well, you're stupid too. They just said, well, hey, you think I'm stupid, but I'm cute, or I'm the best baseball player, or yeah, well, I got the best hair on the planet. So they can actually say things that make them feel better. And I always say to the kid, let's practice that. And then the kid goes, what's funny, because now what's he going to say back to me? There's nothing to say back to that. Like, yeah, all right, your hair's okay. So there's nothing to really say back. So I like to arm them with a few little funny things to say. Once they feel better about their mental health and their physical strength, then kids tend to have a lot more self-esteem going into a bullying relationship, to just say, like, you really need to leave me alone and I'm out of here. I always believe in speaking to your doctor, counselor, anybody that you feel can give you extra help. It's really important. As I said before, I think most of what we do as pediatricians is take care of the kids' mental health and development. Most kids are healthy physically. It's just what's going on upstairs, and really exploring, asking kids at a young age, not too young, but when they're comfortable about their physicality, their sexuality, asking them if they're comfortable talking about it, if they have questions for you when they're, end of middle school, beginning of middle school, because I think that some of these kids, the LGBTQ issue is huge. And a lot of that I found, and my kids who have a lot of gender identity issues have had lots of background in anxiety and depression and bullying. And once we sort of get the topic out and we talk about it, the kids do much better, especially if we can find good groups for them to get into, and counseling for them. What else can I say? I think that's all I really had. I think that's sums it up.
Janice, if I can chime in, I think that what you said was really poignant. That and also Joe said it as well, that going to the parents is not always the best solution. I remember that one day my son, who was before puberty, was on a school bus with a teenager who was a big football player kid, and my son came back with a big bruise on his shoulder, and I said, hey, where did that come from, Just? And he said he was joking around with this kid and he punched him in the arm. And I was looking at it, and it was a pretty bad bruise on his arm, and I decided that, it was just too aggressive of this kid. to be with my son. And, I went to the school and I said, this big, teenager just hit my 12-year-old in the shoulder and bruised him. And they wanted me to talk with the parents. So I called up the dad. I told him what happened. The next day, he was at my door and I showed the dad my son's shoulder, and he took his son and shoved him and said, "How could you do that?" And I realized, okay, now I see where this kid is getting this behavior from. His father's
Really?
aggressive with him. That's not the remediation I wanted, although I might have on some level found it gratifying. It's really not the answer. The answer is to learn how to use your words, how to kid around without hurting each other, not to bully. And, this kid did have a power imbalance with my son. He was, huge, kid who had already gone through puberty. So you have to understand that when someone is bullying someone else, it's probably, because of what's going on at home, the parenting they're getting, or the structure of their home. And I agree with Joe, you're not likely to find a partner in that parent to help the situation. I'm not saying that it could never happen. Maybe we'll find a parent's very receptive. They might sit down and gently talk about the issue and how it's not okay. But more likely than not, that parent is already making some kind of parenting error that might be leading to the behavior. Wouldn't you say, Joe?
Yeah, I think the one of the largest reasons why usually you don't find an equal partner in that conversation is because it forces them to have to look into their own home as to why that behavior could be happening, which automatically puts them sometimes on an uncomfortable footing because they have to look in a mirror in a lot of aspects. So nobody likes to do that. So I think that's why typically in our experience, you don't find an equal participant. But like you said, it's not a hard and fast rule. Sometimes you do. Some people are completely blown away by the fact that their kid would do this and they take action in it. Other times it's an excuse, or other times it's reacted to a way like your story, where it was in an equally as aggressive way. So there's nothing also wrong with kind of taking the hybrid model, maybe approaching a parent, but also continue to keep the school engaged in the solution too. Don't just take it as a one-track way.
And if a parent's not getting satisfaction at the school level, and a school should really have a zero tolerance policy for bullying, they can kick it up. They can go to the district, or you can get a parent advocate involved. There are ways to work the administration of a school system. If they start getting a lot of blogs or a lot of messaging that there is bullying rampant in their school, it's not going to reflect well upon them. So, they really want to quash this type of behavior, and sometimes kicking it up or escalating to another level in the district, for example, might be a solution.
The other thing attached to that is putting things in writing. Phone calls are always great to higher ups, but if that's the way you'd like to do it, have a vocal conversation, that's fine. But always memorialize the conversation in writing, or start in writing. It's very difficult to be able to, and I'm not saying that a school would do this, but it's very difficult to wage we didn't know about that, or we never said that, if the conversation is memorialized. It's very important for that, for it to be there. It's much easier to argue with a phone conversation or a face-to-face dialogue than it is with things in writing.
And Joe, I'm seeing a lot of questions in the chat about people asking about specific strategies that schools might be implementing. Do you have any experience with that?
Yeah, so actually there was an earlier question that I'm going to tie that to this too. So somebody asked about, the cyberbullying element in all of this, and the fact that schools, the difficulty with them getting to monitor that. And of course, the school district does not monitor what goes on kids' social media. A lot of them have geo fences and things like that, where they're not able to get on to apps while they're in school. So that's one way that they're able to control it. But contrary to what a lot of people believe, a school district can take specific action in a cyberbullying situation because the rule used to be prior to the Dignity Act in 2013, it used to be that if an incident did not start at school and follow them home, or start home and follow them directly back to school, that they were kind of, we're kind of hands off on it right now. Cyberbullying has kind of done away with that, because now the question would be, the basic litmus test to need to hit the benchmark is, does what's going on have the ability to impact the educational process for a student? One student or many students? And if the answer to that question is yes, that there would be an educational impact, then a school will get involved. As far as specific things that a school can do, sometimes it's very easy as, sitting both parties down, having the conversation. We are usually not a proponent for conflict mediating a way out of a bullying situation, because the fundamental thing to understand about bullying is the person on the receiving end is not a participant in why what's happening to them is happening to them. When you put two parties together and say, let's work it out, you now basically say that both parties bear equal responsibility for coming to a solution to a problem that one of them didn't start. So how can one of them be expected to solve an issue that they didn't start? Unfortunately, we do see that a lot as finding a way a way out of the situation, and unfortunately, sometimes it makes it worse. But simpler things like changing schedules, making sure that the kids are not in the lunchroom at the same time, making sure that they don't share classes together, limiting the amount of time that kids can be around each other if there's an existing problem, is often a great tool that school can use. Unfortunately, a lot of people do feel, if you're the family of the person who's on the receiving end of the bullying, that oftentimes it's the victim or the target whose life is made more difficult than it is the person who's actually the aggressor. And sometimes, unfortunately, it is that way. It's extremely unfortunate, but it is that way. The other last piece that I would say is, again, going back to the reason that schools can kind of get involved, the educational process connection. That doesn't necessarily mean, and we had this case a couple of weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago, a family reached out to us and said, well, I'm going to call the school on the first day, and I want that kid suspended on the very first day of school. Well, why? Well, because he's been bullying my son since July. Okay, they can't get involved in that perspective. It didn't start with them. There is still elements of existing rules. It didn't start with them. Is it likely to follow them into school? Yes, because cyberbullying and social media doesn't stop at the school's doorway. What the advice would be given there is, the school can't take action yet, but you should warn the school, listen, this was going on over the summer. I just wanted you to be aware of it, so that if something happens during the course of the school day, you know that there is history here. So they can't act on the first day, but they should be kept up to date. And that goes if things happen on vacations as well. So anytime that the school is not directly involved, keep them up to date, and just so that they're in the know. They will likely appreciate the heads up and use it when they're trying to go about trying to solve the issue.
Joe, you want to tell us about the 5K run and walk?
Sure. So my organization obviously is a nonprofit. We do a lot for the community. A lot of what Dr. Montague was just saying about the extracurriculars, equestrian therapy, art therapy, things like that. We actually connect kids with those outlets, as well as mental health therapy. And assist families in actually paying for it, along with a plethora of other things that we do. One of the ways we do that is through events. This is a family-oriented event. It's a couple of miles around Eisenhower Park on a Saturday morning. So we would definitely invite anybody who'd like to come to sign up. It's not just completely geared toward fundraising, but it's also to bring awareness. Take a stand against bullying by coming to an event like this, things like that. So I appreciate, the opportunity to share it with everybody, and hope to see everybody there.
Thank you. So if a parent has a child and they're experiencing bullying, and they wanted to reach out to you, how would that work? Would there be an intake? Is there a phone call? How do they go about all of that?
So the process is the phone number is 516-777-7709. I could throw it in the chat too. You can call. The line is open from 8 in the morning to 8 at night, Monday through Friday, on call on the weekends. You could email a confidential email address that's monitored. And what happens after that is somebody on our response team, which is trained individuals who are trained, with how to solve bullying related issues or dispense advice, will work with the family. A lot of times it's just sitting on the phone, listening to the story and what's going on. A lot of times we don't really have to take action. It's just a parent feeling more confident that there's somebody out there that will listen to them and possibly offer advice. But if it goes beyond that, which it does sometimes, we can dispense everything from advice as far as how to appropriately deal with the school, what questions should be asking, what are the reasonable expectations that a school should take, things like that. And then graduating from that to actual action is where we recommend, would you like to see a therapist? Would you like to, do you have interest in horseback riding? Or how are grades doing? Would you like a tutor? We can do that as well. So a lot of different things, but it all starts with a phone call. And then after that, we kind of stay involved for a couple of weeks to keep, again, following through, just to see how things are progressing.
Now it says LI, so that's Long Island.
Yes.
We have people that may be watching in other places. Do you have similar organizations around New York?
For the time being, it's only us that does this kind of specific outreach, and it's for the moment it's still concentrated on Nassau and Suffolk County, unfortunately. But that predominantly comes to when it's dispensing financial responsibilities in things. If somebody were to call, we would certainly not say, "I'm sorry, you don't live on Long Island, we can't talk to you." So if somebody would like to talk, we would absolutely accept the call.
Definitely
Great.
put that contact information in the chat, Joe.
Yeah, well, we'll include it when we send the email out to everybody with the recording. Dr. Montague, do you know, are there similar agencies upstate? Not upstate.
Absolutely not. This is astounding. I'm like gonna call Joe and we're gonna talk about that because I've been looking, and personally, I'm gonna say, as a parent and as a doctor in my community, and I've had trouble, getting to the schools. I get a lot of school pushback, talk to the parents, you guys work it out. And that what you said about the mediation thing, about it, totally, these poor kids are like, I didn't do anything wrong. So I know, not that I know of. I mean, I could be wrong, but I think you're one of a kind.
So there were a few questions in the chat about what actually constitutes bullying. These are some of the questions that came in before the lecture. So, lots of times children are left out of activities. Certain girls don't want to sit with them at lunch, or there's a birthday party that they weren't included with, and they feel bad about that. At what point does that rise to the level of bullying? I'll throw it to you, Marc.
So bullying really is unwanted, it's repetitive, and it causes harm. So, kids can be mean to each other here or there. It's really a pattern of behavior. And if it's persistent from a person, to another person, victimizing that person, then it's bullying. I think that, there was a question in the chat about toddlers. And, I really think that it's kind of young to be thinking about bullying in toddlers. We're really thinking about more school-age children when we're looking at this behavior. Although toddlers can have inappropriate behavior, it's a great time to correct that behavior when they're toddlers. If parents are, we usually don't let toddlers have unsupervised play when they're very young. We're usually much there for play dates. If we're at the park, we're watching them. So if we see a toddler being aggressive in some way, we definitely can correct that behavior right away. And if a child doesn't want to play with another toddler because they're constantly aggressive, I think a child has a right to say, hey, this kid is just too rough for me. It's not part of my personality. And a parent should respect that choice and listen to their toddler if they say, Billy is just too rough and tumble for me. Maybe they should select out another type of friend for him. But you're right. A lot of times in girls' circles or in boys' circles, they might exclude somebody from a party or might kick them out of a social group. I think that if it reflects a pattern of behavior or is really isolating the child, then you can consider that they were bullied.
Thank you.
If I could feed off that 1 second, a lot of times one of the most overlooked forms of bullying is the mental and the social aspect of it. We know the verbal, we know the physical, we now know the cyber, but the fourth one is the mental and the social aspect of it. And I think a lot of it, really, the definition really boils down to what's the intention? Is the intention to cause the person harm? That's kind of, we talk all the time, the difference between teasing and taunting. Well, teasing is lighthearted and jovial. It's not meant to be making somebody the brunt of the aggression. It's meant to, kind of make everybody feel welcome. And yes, it's at somebody's expense, but not to the intent to hurt them. That's where then you go into the realm of taunting. But to the exclusion perspective, that's typically the way the social part works. It's the underneath the radar type thing. It's not just, now it's kind of evolved to, no, we don't want you to, we're all getting together and we're going to sleep at so-and-so's house tonight, but you're not invited. But then it doesn't just stop there. It then has to be put on Snapchat so that the person who got left out knows that they were left out and everybody's having a great time. So the mental aspect, the mental part of bullying, I think, is overlooked, but equally as important.
And I think Janice said that, not only do we have to identify it from the bully side, but we have to bolster the bullied person or the person who was excluded. So give that child tools on how to move on and how to create new social situations and groups, how to feel good about themselves and not put all their worth into this one group or this one person. Isn't that what you were saying, Jen?
Yes, and I was going to add to that there's so many books written on this topic. Relational aggression is basically what it's called, and it's mostly points to girls, but it can happen with boys, and it is a huge factor in kids' self-esteem. They tend to, form social groups, and you see as they grow, a lot of it sometimes is who the parents hang out with, and then related to that, and then one or two might drop off, and there'll be a core group, and then eventually, this one's not smoking with them, or this one's not wearing makeup, or this one's not cool enough for them, or not allowed to stay out and go to the football game. They'll start leaving them out, and as I said before, it doesn't just we go home and you don't think about it, because that's following them through Snapchat and every other social media outlet. They could see these kids having fun without them. And I have, as a parent, have had lots of experience with that. And my experience is when you try to talk to the other moms, they say, well, everyone can't be invited. And they do not see that it's hurting your child. And, there's no reason that 5 kids can be not one child. But that being said, the best way to do that is to just say to your kid, okay, this isn't really working out. These kids don't want maybe don't want you to hang out with them. Maybe that's a little harsh, but let's try to see ways we can make new friends. How could we do that? Can we join a bowling league? Can we do another sports team? Can we go to a dojo? Can we, there's so many ways that we as parents can enroll them in different activities. You okay, Kerry? And that will make them feel better about themselves and give them the ability to meet new kids. Sometimes they actually need some social skills training, right? They need to learn how to make a friend. Sometimes we've made all their friends for them. So sometimes enrolling them in a social skills class and, nice to meet you. I like anime. Do you like anime? And, they have a new little hobby to do together with their new friend. Kids often meet on video games, which for us, we're like, oh, that's so weird. But then it actually turns out some of these kids will have a lot in common depending on the kind of video game they're playing. And that's actually not bad, but it might behoove us to say, hey, who's that kid you've been playing with all the time? Maybe we can arrange go out for ice cream or something with their parent or something like
and
that.
Jen, wouldn't you agree that nothing creates a victim more than low self-esteem?
Absolutely, 100%.
If a child already starts out with low self-esteem, the other kids perceive it.
Yep.
And they make them into a target. So these kids with low self-esteem, the prescription is to increase their self-esteem. And all those different things that you mentioned are the way to do it. Working with a therapist, even working, with different bolstering activities. And when they build themselves up to the degree, they won't be the victim. They won't need to be worried about the bully.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree with that. As a parent, lots of times you want the other child to stop bothering your child, right? And the same way that the parents of the bully may not want to look inside, the parents of the child that's being bullied don't necessarily want to look inside, right? If only this other child would go away, then my child's life would be better. And that is not usually the case. And building them up in some way is a really good thing. The other thing that's really helpful is if one child, right, is nice to them or speaks up for them. And, we call that a bystander. And we didn't talk about that really, much at all, that even if your child's not the one being bullied, just watching it can be stressful for the bystander. Joe, do you have any thoughts on what that child could do to intervene, to make themselves feel better and to help the other child?
Yeah. So a great way is just by being a friend to them. If they see something that's going on with them, say, you know what, something like, you don't need them, I'll hang out with you. If you're sitting by yourself at lunch, be the person who, they could get up and go sit with the person at lunch. Let them know that they have an ally. Perfect example, when my bullying started in the 6th grade, I moved to a brand new town. I started the 6th grade without knowing a single human being in the building. So it was a very lonely place to be. And unfortunately, not many people, were brave enough to come sit with the kid that nobody knew. But eventually, as I got older, people started to do that. And it was such a simple thing to do, but was so like earth moving for me to know that there was somebody else out there that cared enough, that expressed an interest. And sometimes it really only takes is one person, because a lot of times they're thinking that nobody likes me, nobody wants me around, everybody has a problem with me, and then all of a sudden there's the one person who doesn't, and usually with the one comes a couple of extras. But a little bit more beyond that, a lot of times kids don't want to take direct involvement in saying, stop doing this behavior, because they're afraid of getting looped into and becoming a target of their own. Very likely scenario, unfortunately. However, what we do to often tend to overlook in this conversation is the bullying actually can stop fairly quickly when they receive opposition, because again, it goes back to the very basic of the imbalance of power thing. They're doing it for a power achievement. If they're seeing that they're not getting the power, they'll move on. Unfortunately, because we don't often address why they're bullying, they leave the one person alone and find somebody else very quickly. So the cycle continues, which is why we do need to put in a substantial investment into why kids are doing what they're doing. But opposing a bully often does work more often than we think it does.
From the child themselves, you're saying, or a bystander?
The bystander. If the person who is the aggressor gets opposition, somebody says, stop, leave me alone, they don't want that. They're counting on people, being like, oh no, and kind of getting caught up in it, which is why, again, going back to the self-confidence piece, the more self-confident a person is, and the more confidence they have, they're not going to get, knocked down and bulldozed, which is what really the person who's the aggressor is looking for. So if they get opposition and it's not as easy as they want it to be, unfortunately, they'll move on to somebody else, but that particular kid would probably be left alone.
Great. Does anybody see any questions that we didn't get to? Anything?
I
We'll
think
let,
one question
everybody-
that had come through, Dr. Fierstein, people were wondering, or there was a few parents that had wondered if your child has special needs, how to be an advocate for them and, how to help them navigate that. I think there was a question on hearing impairment, something of that nature.
Dr. Montague, you want to pick that one up?
Again, I think it's a lot of the same, right? So last night I was watching, and of course now I can't remember the name of it. It's Fashion Week, and all these there's a company that's raising money to make fashion accessible to all differently abled people, right? And so all these kids and adults and people are modeling and raising money, and it's Kohl's and JCPenney and French Toast and all the and Adidas and all these great brands. So even involving your child in something like that, it's so empowering. And these people were saying, like, being on the stage is just like, look at me, I'm here wearing this crazy thing that I couldn't, took me a half an hour to put on a year ago. Now I have something that I could put on really quickly and makes me look fashionable and cool. Sometimes just, finding whatever it is that they're into, making them feel good about themselves. I think it's really all related to what their abilities are, right? So let's pump up their abilities, make them feel really good about themselves. It doesn't matter. I mean, I come from a hearing impaired family. I could go on all night about that. But that being said, you just have to, so this person could become a doctor, or this person could become a downhill skier. So whatever it is that your kid can do, we should really build up. Maybe he's a great artist and we want to find a gallery that wants to accept his art, or take classes in an art studio. And I think there's plenty of things that differently able people can do that make them feel good about themselves. I definitely know that kids with disabilities are going to get looked at differently. I see it in my office with kids looking at other kids or even adults. And it's all about how we approach it too. Like, we should also be teaching our kids about what disabilities are and making sure they understand that there are different people with different abilities everywhere we go. And that person's in a wheelchair because that chair helps him get around, and now he can go grocery shopping. So, I don't mean to always put a positive spin on things, but obviously we use these accessories and things to make us able to get around in the world. So hopefully we can make our kids feel like, you might have a G-tube, but so what? Because you're the best skier in the family.
Yeah, but Jen, we all know that disabled kids are vulnerable, right?
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
right.
Absolutely, 100%. They are.
Kids
But
with
again, it's a self-esteem thing.
autism, mental retardation, physical disabilities, they're definitely vulnerable. And some of them aren't even able to articulate that they're being bullied. So these kids really need to have good supervision. Yeah. Their parents have to be attentive, looking for the signs of bullying that we talked about before: bruises, problems in personality, weight, and their mood. And, they just need watching quite a bit much more than the average able kid if they can't communicate or don't have the tools to be able to articulate to their parents what's going on.
And particularly with the special needs population, there are two things. The school districts, if they are aware of a problem, they can write it into the IEP for the student, which will make it binding, that they're aware of the situation and that something's going on. But secondarily to that, also, what we've kind of seen is it's not the kids who are very clearly have differing abilities. It's not the kids who are, who have Down syndrome, things like that. It's more along the lines of the kids who you're not really on a first look at them able to tell that something's not, that something it might be different about them. And when I say that, I'm talking more lines of kids who fall onto the spectrum, but could have, Asperger's, where they may appear to be normal, but they have, different parts of their personalities that people look at and they'll latch on to. Or kids who, again, look normal, but have Tourette's, and Tourette's manifests itself in a lot of different ways. It could be tics, it could be the vocal outbursts, things like that. So it's usually kids are able to kind of say, that person is autistic. They have something, they have a different ability than I do. And if it's more evident, they kind of are left alone. But it's the more ones that you're not so able to see it clearly that tend to have the more of the difficult time. But again, the IEPs are very important when working with the school, things like that. So they're definitely a protected class that definitely needs it. But there are some extra tools there.
Thank you. Joe, there was a question about if you think your child is a bully. Is that something that your group would help somebody with as well?
We would love to, but I would be completely honest with you, in 9 years, that call has never come. But I can say now, for anybody listening, we would absolutely welcome that conversation for sure. Any of the services that we would provide to somebody who's being targeted, we would absolutely offer to somebody who is, demonstrating the behavior and is looking for help.
Yeah, I would say those calls come to us as the pediatrician probably more than they would come to you.
Probably.
To me, they come as calls like my son's being aggressive, or my son is having malfeasant behavior. My son sprayed graffiti on the school. My son was suspended. You know, in girls, it's more like catty behavior or rarely delinquent behavior, but it is manifested differently in girls. It's more often in boys.
So Janice, do you want to have any parting words?
Well, I think you should absolutely reach out to your pediatrician if you have any concerns about your child's behavior at school, out of school, in the house, because there's probably more than meets the eye. I find with any behavior changes that something is definitely going on. So if you're having trouble like finding that out, the first thing to do is maybe reach out to Joe, reach out to a pediatrician and ask for some help. I think a quick visit, sometimes we can elucidate a little more than you probably can at home.
Right. And I'm going to suggest that a visit as opposed to a phone call, because sometimes parents call and they want a 30-second answer, and there is no 30-second answer. Telemed, if your doctor does that, is fine, because we often don't need the child there. And we certainly don't need to examine them. Dr. Lashley, Marc, any parting words?
And don't forget, the web is your friend. There's a lot of online, even national bully hotlines, and a lot of great bullying resources. There's a national bullying center in Washington, D.C. And I did, when I was doing my research for this talk, I went there, and all you have to do is type in bullying or stopbullying.gov, I believe it was called, and some great resources for parents there.
Yeah, and in addition to dealing with the bullying, treat the anxiety, treat the depression. Those are things that your pediatrician can help you with. Even if we can't necessarily stop the bullying, we can point you in the right direction and deal with the other issues. Joe?
I just really want to say thank you to everybody who, took the time to, to listen tonight. The first step in a lot of all this is getting education. So the more armed with the tools that we, that we can disseminate, the better. And, just keep having the conversation and watch what's going on, not too closely, but also not too distant and far away either. Again, that happy medium. And, again, like Dr. Lashley said, there are plenty of national organizations. There's us on Long Island, but there's definitely resources and people who are prepared to help should you have a problem.
Well, I hope your phones are well manned tomorrow, because I really think that everybody who listened tonight, probably because there's some issue they have, should call you.
Well,
right?
we will be here.
You have this great resource, and they don't actually, just like when they call us, they don't actually have to do anything we tell them. But hearing what you have to say is probably going to be really useful.
We are here.
Well, thank you, everybody on the panel. Thank you, everybody who listened. Thank you, Ari and Allied, for sponsoring. Have a great night.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Good night, everyone.
Right.